What's up, bro?
How are you?
Good to have you back.
Nice to be here.
It's been a minute.
I missed you.
Missed you too. Finally got our new studio built out.
Looks amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, it's an election year. As
No
as
way.
You know. Yeah, right. You know, it's been interesting, this whole election cycle and seeing some of these different levers being pulled in different areas. I think about a guy like Bill Maher. And most people know who Bill Maher is, comedian turned talk show host. And he said a lot of things lately that I'd love to get your opinion on. He's talking about his party. And this isn't
The old school liberal.
correct. Yeah. He's talking about him being an old school liberal. Like, it's interesting. Like, what's an old school liberal? How is that? How have we shifted? And what does that look like? And what does it mean for people? Because someone would say, like a Bill Maher, he makes the argument that his old school liberalism doesn't look much like liberalism today. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting argument because we talk about progress, but like, what does progress look like, and who does it affect, and how many people are on board for it in whatever ways that it's being
Well, I think not only
projected.
from if we want to go Democrat and Republican, right? Like, I would consider myself more of an old school conservative, right? I mean, I was kind of brought up in the Reagans, right? The Bushes, right? Like, and now, right, that's a bad term called a rhino, and obviously I'm still, if you put the two in front of me, I'm still always going to go to the right just because of a fiscal scenario. But I think both parties have moved so far to their extremes that the majority of the country, right, we've always kind of been a center-right country, right? Like, more progressive when it comes to social issues and more conservative when it comes to fiscal issues, right? And I don't think either party really talks to the majority of Americans anymore. They talk to their extremes and just assume that, oh, you've always voted for a Republican, you're going to vote for a Republican. You've always voted for a Democrat, you're going to continue to be a Democrat. And I think this election, you're starting to see people change because they just can't get on board on either side, right? You've got your never Trumpers who, based on who he is as his personality, they're just not going to vote for him. And you have your people who are just saying, you know what, I've always been a Democrat, but the Democratic Party has become so far left and so liberal on some of my, religious ideologies that I can't support that anymore. And so I talk about this a lot, right? Like, the country, in my mind, would be better served with four parties. Four parties would make sense for me. You can have your far right, your far left, your center right, but neither party is going to give up power for us ever to be there.
Right, because we've had, we have the Libertarians, we have who else do we have? We've got the Independents, who have been like sort of that
your
staple.
Green Party,
right?
Your Green Party. It's always been more further left,
Right.
But now it's like which side can chase to their extremes the most, and then fearmonger and tell. This is what I get tired of. I get tired of, I'm not going to count how many election cycles I've been in, but I was born in 1980, right? So let's say I started paying attention really kind of young, like 92, right? And ever since probably George Bush was in, every election has been, this is the most consequential election of your life.
I heard it just last night.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's and at the end of the day, I agree, they're all consequential, but when you put all of this fear, like, look, I will vote for a Republican, but do I think that the world is just going to come crashing down if a Democrat wins? No, because first of all, the president has a lot of power, but there's also two separate,
we have separation of powers.
Separation of powers, right? And we all know it's going to be a 51-49 split in the Senate. The House is going to be somewhat split. So we're basically not going to get anything done for the next 4 years, no matter who the president is, right? Unless we're doing executive action. And even then, right, it's constrained.
Well, and what's interesting about what you just said, it's so true. And I've said this as well, and when I'm sitting down with a client, we're talking about election year, I'm like, how many elections have you been through? Mm-hmm. How many different administrations have you had in your life? How much has your life been altered through each administration. Granted, yes, there are some things that each administration affects, and wars and all kinds of other things. However, to your point, it's probably not the end of the world.
Right. Either way
Ever. And someone might say, no, it could be. Okay. Yeah, I'll give you that. It could be. However, the other point you make, and I want to spend a little time on this, because you talk about the separation of powers, and we just came back from a retreat in DC with our leadership group. Fantastic experience.
Yep.
And talking through some of these aspects of the founders of the nation in terms of their vision for keeping tyranny and oppression from becoming reoccurring as it did in those days, of course, in many of the monarchies. What's interesting, though, is that not much happens unless someone comes along who can reach across the other side. Like you mentioned Reagan. Like Reagan, as much as, in the beginning, people didn't know what he was going to do, this actor, governor actor. However, he was able to connect with the other side and actually get some things done. And that's what I think the beauty of like unlocking our democracy, like one of the beauties of unlocking it is finding a way to find that middle ground.
Absolutely. And that's where the majority of people are, right? Like the majority of people are middle ground, right? If you sat a Democrat, a Republican, a Green Party, and you sat them down and you said, what are your top 10 issues in your day-to-day life that you want government to help fix? You're going to find 3 or 4 of the same things amongst all of them, right? You're going to have your fringe issues that only, attract certain people. But at the end of the day, people, they want to feel safe. They want to be able to prosper. They want to be able to live their life with as little government interaction as possible, right? If there's a massive disaster or something's happening, they want a stopgap, right? They want to know that somebody's there is going to make sure that they're okay. But other than that, right, the rest is just personal opinions on topics.
Yeah. It's interesting because we spent a lot of time studying those 3 promises: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, just that's really essentially what you were just describing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like it hasn't changed. That's from the beginning. That was the promise, and today it's still the goal of who we are as individuals and as of a nation. And I found also that we have to be super, super careful. And we talk about this off camera, and there's a lot on this subject, but the media. We have to be thinkers. We have to think beyond whatever's being fed to us, go deeper, spend more time getting to the source. Like, okay, this is what's been said. All right, cool. Let me look it up.
Yep.
Let me find out where this is leading from. And I think, and folks, like, you might love him, you might hate him, but RFK, making some of the statements that he's made recently have been pretty like earth-shattering in terms of like, oh my goodness, like some of the things, and I won't go into all the details of what he stated, but okay, fine. He said what he said. Do your research.
Yep. Agreed. I think a lot of us, especially right in the year 2024, we all get online, we go to our social networks, we go to our echo chambers, we search out validation that our points are correct instead of going out and researching to see if we are actually correct.
Yeah, and our streams, as you know, our algorithms are feeding that.
Correct.
Right. As soon as you say one thing or the other, then all of a sudden your algorithm starts saying, "Oh, hey, right. I know how to make you feel really good about how you feel." Yeah,
I know how to addict you, and that's why I thought, the vice president debate, and I don't think they probably changed many minds one way or the other, right? Because at this point, I mean,
a lot of people say it's inconsequential. However,
it was refreshing to see 2 people have a disagreement but be cordial about it.
Yeah.
And not attack each other necessarily personally, but to at least exchange ideas in a free form and say, I agree or I disagree.
Brother, 1,000,000,000,000%. Like, it was so refreshing to just see human beings communicate.
Yep.
And that's what, when you just said, you gave the definition of communication. The definition of communication is an exchange of ideas. Like, here's my idea. I'm gonna give it to you. You give me your idea, and let's just simmer on the ideas and respect that we have differences, and also acknowledge one another as human beings. That discourse was just like, it was life-giving. Like, oh my goodness, there's
hope.
Yes, there's hope.
There's
yeah,
hope.
yeah.
There's hope for this, this thing called, democracy, right? Like, there's hope for this. And then it's just, and it also on like, it gives you hope. And then on the other side, you just think, and you're like, wow. I mean, I don't know how many people are in Congress, right? Like 400 and something people, right? Total, like between, both houses. But it's like, if they could all just have a conversation and say, okay, here's our 10 things, right? Here's the 5 things that we absolutely are not going to change our opinions on each other, but here's 5 things that we kind of see the same light on, and let's create something that addresses those 5 things, right? And I always say, right, when I'm negotiating with somebody, right, like I'm always up front and I say, right, the best deal is when we both leave knowing that we left something on the table, but it's a mutual beneficial win, right? If one person leaves a negotiation and they got everything they wanted, that other person that didn't get anything that they wanted is not happy, right? There's no win there for them. You have to find a way in life, right? I mean, marriage, parenting, business, politics, people have to find a way to understand you're not going to get every single thing that you want, and the other person needs to get something that they want so that there's a continuing desire to work together to move forward.
And that's politics, that's relationships, that's business, that's anything you're doing. In fact, it reminded me of a conversation I just had with one of our newest clients in our advisory program. And they were going to sign the contract regardless. They knew that the program was a fit for them. However, at the very end, said, hey, I'm going to need a little more of this service. Can you throw in a few more hours of that? For me, it was nothing. It was just a way to say, absolutely, you know what? Let me give you a little bit of something that's going to make you feel even better about this, right? And like, if I could have been like, no, that's what we do. Right. That's a contract. Can't do it. I know you're gonna sign anyway because you need the stuff. But
they feel good.
They feel good.
And part of our job as human beings is we should be wanting people to feel good about our interactions with us.
Yes. We're emotional creatures, by the way. We still are.
Yes.
There's a lot of logic and reason. Right. But let me tell you, emotions drive decisions just as much.
And if people step back from the transactional approach of I'm going to come in and dominate and get everything that I want, you may, but that's the last time you're ever going to win. You're never going to win again, and nobody's looking ahead. And, we go take it back to politics. Everybody is looking at, I think, right, I feel, right, that politicians are looking at it on what can I get, what can I win, instead of what can we get done for the country, right? There's been that paradigm switch that's happened, and maybe it's just revisionist history. When you look back at some of the presidents and leaders that we've had previously, you feel like they were putting the country first, right? Like they really kind of felt that way. Yeah. And in no sense of the word do I feel that we have any, like, one politician that you could hold up and be like, here's the person that we want to emulate. Right. Because everybody has and because of that, it's created this rift in society as a whole, right? Like, I could garner a bet on who you're going to vote for, but we don't talk about it. But I don't think of you any less if you were going to say I'm voting for the other person, right? Like, and you've got husbands and wives who are like, oh well, my significant other doesn't know who I'm going to vote for, and it's creating these divisions in family and everything like that, and it absolutely blows my mind. Yeah, same. Yeah, even the 2016 election, I was so dissatisfied with initially with the choices, the options, that I even told my wife, I was like, I'm not voting this year. And she was like, you have to vote. You have to, this is your one vote. I'm like, I'm not voting. Right. But there was a lot of, the 2016 was, I suspect that many families and many people were like, hey, lots of tension and whatnot. And of course, there's other election cycles. To your point, though, it's very personal.
And there's a lot of changes that's happened too over the last several decades, if not longer. When we were at DC, we stopped at Arlington Cemetery, and we were standing in front of a number of different sites, and one of them was Kennedy's gravesite. Of course, there's the inscription there of "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And it's like, man, I've heard that so many times, but just in that
bring that forward
space.
To today,
yeah,
and literally see who. If somebody said that, right, what would they be considered? You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? What can I do for my country? I'm going to sacrifice for my country. And you go back to your original statement about Bill Maher. Like, where would these great leaders, whether they were Democrat or Republican at the time, where would they fall today? Right? Would they still would Kennedy be a Democrat today? Right? Like, you have no idea. I mean, he was pretty conservative. Would Bill Clinton be considered a Democrat today? Right? I mean, because he was pretty conservative, and half the Republicans probably wouldn't have even had a chance to even run because they didn't fit some ideologue that is being pressed upon us, right?
Right.
And so,
but it's interesting you bring that up because there's so much shifting that's happened over the last maybe decade to 2 decades. Even you talked about Republicans. Like I never thought I'd see the day where there was even movement on reproductive rights.
Absolutely.
And so like now there's movement further center than further right in terms of, hey, this is a topic we need to move over further toward really a left idea. Now I'm not saying everyone's in that
right.
camp. However, as a whole, you're starting to see that.
I think the Republican platform, this was the first time in I don't know how many years that abolishing abortion wasn't even part of their platform.
Wasn't part of the platform, and of course unions and focus on the blue collar
union leaders. I mean, it's crazy because union they take this vote of the Teamsters. I think it was the Teamsters. I don't want my union friends to get mad, right? But and it was 60-something% wanted to vote for Trump, and so they couldn't come out and say they were for the Democratic Party anymore. And that's crazy. I mean, if you go back 20 years, I'm from a blue-collar steel mill town, and really 2016 was a switch, and it had been a few years since I had been there. But, President Trump came and visited that blue-collar town in the steel mill, and everybody votes Republican now in Madison County, Illinois. When I was a kid, you couldn't – it was like 99% to 1, when you would see the election results. And so you have these paradigm shifts, and you have, everybody kind of moving, and whether it's from a racial standpoint where you have people, voting for different parties or, societal changes, and we are in a very tumultuous time.
Oh my goodness!
In the world.
Yeah, and I can say, with some degree of confidence that there's been more shifting in the last 4 years than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Agreed. In terms of that. And even just unprecedented shifting where you have a former president who is now a convicted felon. And
could you imagine in the year, just go back to 1998, if George Bush, I remember it came out that he got a DUI. When it wasn't even a DUI, you didn't even get arrested, you just got a ticket. And that was the October surprise. And everybody thought, oh my God, Al Gore's going to win now because George Bush got a DUI when he was 22 years old driving down some country road. And now fast forward, and today, that's not even a blip on the radar anymore.
No, it's not a blip. And at the same time, you have that. You have people who have said, well, our government's corrupt anyway. Yeah, he would have never been indicted if he wasn't running for president. Correct. And you're like, well, there may be some truth to that.
There probably is a lot of truth.
Right?
Right.
It's there's probably a lot of people who have done those kind of things who are they're not on the radar. So you don't want him out of an election. Now, granted, we're not going to go down the rabbit trail of all that. But the point is that we're talking about all of this things that have never been addressed before on this level, and they're out in the front now. And on top of that, you have the first. The first candidate for female president who's also a part African American, Jamaican descent.
Yep.
Yeah, Jamaican descent, and then part Indian descent. So a person of color, a female of color, and then of course you have the first former president felon who's rerunning for.
Right, man.
I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to like get it all right. Who's running for president for his second term? Like these are firsts ever, and you have people on both sides. So you have folks on who have said, we need to have Kamala in the office, and then others who were perhaps voting left have said, hey, you know what? I'm a convicted felon, and I know the system can be corrupt. I'm not saying it is in this situation, but he's my guy now.
That's my guy, right? Like that, I relate to him because he's being persecuted like I've been persecuted, or I feel like I've been persecuted. But to kind of tie it together, I think what holds true is it comes back to the vision, which was the Constitution, right? And we have this vision of what our founders wanted our country to abide by, and however crazy it gets, there's still this bumper, right, that keeps us in some type of check.
And that is where I'm so glad you brought it back up, because we will put our stamp, our one vote behind the person who we believe individually will give us that at least some level of direction for the vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whoever that looks like for you, that's who you're going to vote for.
Yep. That's how you define it.
Yeah. So do the homework, and who that individual is. Obviously, they're going for the middle right now, right? Because far left is voting for far left, far right's voting for far right.
And I would love to know who's still undecided, right? They keep talking about these undecided. Like, at this point, who's undecided when we're 30-something days left to the election?
Gosh, yeah. Who's undecided? And I suspect there are folks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's certainly folks who, especially with RFK going from Democrat to independent. Of course, he's still independent. However, now supporting Trump.
Yep.
And which to me was like mind blowing in terms of
a Kennedy.
Kennedy.
It's a Kennedy. I mean, it's a Kennedy. And then you've got Elon Musk, who's always said that he's voted Democrat, who's now behind. I mean, so you have two tiers of power that are clashing. I guess it is a very consequential election. Maybe they got this one right. Maybe this will be a very consequential election. Yeah. But I'm just glad we still have. Right, because we talk about vision, we talk about goal casting and what does that look like, and right, and to go back to our trip, and what was striking is like a lot of our founders were so young, you know what I mean, early 20s, and that they had the foresight to be able to put this together, and for 200 and something years, right, like we've continued to hold steady inside. I mean, it's crazy. I'm sure they would have no idea what, if you plop Thomas Jefferson down in 2024, he'd probably be like, what did you guys do? You know what I mean? Like, how did we get here? But, right, like, no matter what happens, I think that the thing is we still have the Constitution. We have three separate but equal, parts of the government. And that Constitution, that vision, it just shows how important it is that it holds us steady.
Yeah, and it's holding true. I mean, and we're going on, it'll be in 2 years, it'll be 250 years. 250 years.
It's crazy.
And the experiment, by the way. So this was, as we talked about on our trip, this was an experiment for the world to see. Mm-hmm. This had never been done before, by the way. This had never been, there's monarchies and different, of course, you had republics, which were, you think of Greece and think of Rome. But this we are a republic, but it's a democratic republic, and the House, the Senate, the judiciary, you had your executive branch, and the world has been watching this experiment called American democracy, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful to have experienced that. If you haven't been to Washington, D.C., and you haven't gone through some of those, just looking at the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and seeing the document, I think that's the real one. I mean, I think it's the real one. And those signatures, right? Those signatures, as you said, young people. A lot of them are in their 20s. Yeah. Think about it. Think about it. Just like, what were you doing in your 20s? I know I wasn't
putting my life on the line for some going against the greatest naval power in the history of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, just like unpack that for just a second. Like, think of the weight of that. The greatest naval power in the history of the world, and you are a band of colonists.
Really?
Yeah.
You're just a bunch of 20-year-olds, a bunch of Gen Zers. There you go, Gen Z. There's hope for you yet.
And to craft this, this expression of freedom that transcends the boundaries of your current context, into the future, and it is a living, breathing document. At the same time, it ensures our rights as human beings, and it's been a testament to checking ourselves against it. Of course, with the 1800s and Lincoln, and of course we studied a little bit of Martin Luther King Jr. and like this check that the U.S. has written, it's bouncing. This reminds us of, hey, are we staying true to our commitment to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all, not just a select handful. Right. Not if you're a celebrity or left or right or wherever.
Right. Yeah. And I also think, right, like the thing about the Constitution is they were smart enough to know they made it very challenging to change it. Yeah. And even in this crazy environment we're in, there's no way that somebody could change it because you could never get it ratified, right? I mean, there's too many difference of opinions, and that's a good thing, right? Because it holds true that your rights are going to be protected.
That's important. Like, this is the foresight it takes to plan that out and say, okay, we know people's opinions will change. We know that there will be some forces that will have more power than others. What can we do to ensure that every voice remains heard and that we don't compromise on our promise through the generations, through the decades,
it's a very complicated form of government when you really break it down. I mean, it's very complicated to come up with that. I mean, it's impressive.
It's impressive, and it's not perfect. However, as Washington said, it's the best we've got, and I think that's where some of the passions come in. I think the passions people have because they want to, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and these amendment rights that people hold on to. They're personal because they are part of the defining of what it means to be an American, really.
When they look around the world and they see other countries that don't have the same rights and what can happen over the course of a generation or two, right? How quickly that country can change.
Well, the First Amendment, just in and of itself, the right to free speech, like we so take it for granted.
Right.
Try it. Just try it in, let's just say, any of our listeners who are in, I don't know, Russia.
Yeah. Right. 1,000%.
Yeah. Or try it in North Korea.
Do we have listeners in North Korea? If you're there, email us.
If you are, you'd probably be part of the military or the parliament or something like that. Listen, you've got access.
But still, dissent and see what happens.
Right. Dissent and see what happens.
Yeah.
And like just to just take a moment to in appreciation of how valuable that right is, the right to bear arms. I know it goes a lot of different ways, and
there's good and bad from everyone, right? Yeah. I mean, free speech means we have to listen to things that we don't want to hear from other people, right? Yeah. But that's their right.
Things that are offensive.
Right to bear arms. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not, I don't walk around with guns on me. You know what I mean? But like,
bro, I mean, it's always a gun show with Travis Revelle.
But I mean, so I mean, I think to for those who, because I mean, I know people in my life, right, who. There's a lot of apprehension about this election, right? There's a lot of nervous energy. People are afraid of what might happen or what could happen. But at the end of the day, right, like, you're still going to have your rights. You know what I mean? They can infringe on your rights. And if they do, right, like, you've got recourses,
Yeah.
And I think that's what's powerful for people to understand is that, on November 5th or 6th, whatever the day after the election is, we're still going to be here.
Yeah.
We're still going to have the ability to have our life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness, however we define that personally.
Yeah, and then in another 4 years, if it's not going the way that you desire, we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's good stuff, man.
Good stuff, man. Good to be back.
Good to have you back.